In this session, without any further ado, we'll promptly be starting with this entire session. In the previous sessions, we discussed almost every topic of verbal reasoning. In today's discussion, we are going to discuss on reading comprehension solely. I kept this topic for the end because it's a tad bit longer than others, and so due to that, we'll be covering this up in this entire session as a whole, and hopefully you guys will get a good idea of what reading comprehension is, what you need to do, and how you can further practice beyond the scope of this session as well. All right. So with that said, now before moving forward to the actual practice problems, I will be providing you guys some tips on how to tackle reading comprehension type problems at the first, right? So first tip is to always go through the questions first and then only through the passage, right? Now, why is this important? Is because when you go through the questions first, you make a map in your picture about what's significant about the passage and what is not, right? Because the passages that you'll be given in PRAGATII exam will be really long. So and when you try to fit in all those information inside of your minds and try to sort of tackle the problems, that won't be the most viable way because that's not possible, right, mentally. So when you read questions in the beginning, it'll be really easy for you to know what's important and what's not. And you can basically skim through the passage and only highlight on the important aspects. Second tip is basically the follow up for the first one. Now, third, you have to make notes as well, right? That is to mean when you have got this particular essay or reading paragraph, you have to underline the important parts that you feel are important after reading the question, and that way you can easily jump through the important sections through the paragraph, right? Now, opening and closing paragraph are really important because they contain specific informations that sort of are not present in the body part, right? They introduce ideas. Both of those types of paragraphs introduce ideas, right? Because in the first paragraph, you'll be introduced with a plethora of ideas, definitions, terminologies, and things of that nature. In the closing paragraph, you will be given a strong message of what the overall past paragraph was about. So pay extra focus to those two, right? Now, constantly self question to stay focused. Just think critically, is what I'm saying, right? Think critically about what the passage is trying to imply, what the ideas are, and not just through rote learning, right? Not just by seeing the exact sentence as they are and finding them in the question, right? Sometimes the questions require you to think out of the box as well. Next up, if the passage you feel is difficult, go through the next one because, as far as I remember, there'll be a few passages in the Pragati exam. So, if the first passage is difficult, then go through the second one, and hopefully that'll help you gain a boost in your confidence. And with that, you might be able to solve the first one as well. And do not read it word by word, right? I mean, critically thinking and reading word by word are quite different, right? So do not memorize every word that's present in the paragraph. Just focus on the important things, right? Examples, illustrations, and trigger words, don't really focus on those as well. Try to focus on the idea that the passage is trying to convey, right? Now, these paragraphs do not really require you to have a master level vocabulary skill, right? They just a mediocre level of vocabulary skill will get you through these types of questions. So do not overemphasize on vocabulary skills and strong words or really difficult words that are present in the paragraph, right? If you don't understand a word, simply skip it, right? You can try to find the meaning of that word through the context in which it is presented, but if you don't get it, simply skip it. There's no real harm in that. Opening and closing paragraph, I've already mentioned about this before. And also, do not think the correct option would come from outside the passage, right? Now, among the options that you're provided, among the four options that you'll be provided, there's only one correct option, right? And that option resides somewhere within the paragraph, right? So, with that said, you have to solely focus on the contents of the paragraph and try to not mix your judgment into those things, right? Because you may have some pre established knowledge about the subject material that is being presented in the paragraph, but don't try to mix that up with the contents that the paragraph is trying to convey, because the questions will simply be asked from the paragraph alone and not from the subject material that you know. All right, with that said, we'll be promptly moving on to some practice problems. Now, as a small caveat, these practice problems will be a bit lengthier than they were in the previous sessions. So try to read as carefully as possible through all of these. This is the first paragraph. I'll be giving you guys a few minutes, 2 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes for reading this. Then we'll move on to the questions. Everyone is getting the paragraph right. It's about street theater, right? So hopefully you guys are getting what the paragraph is trying to convey. I'll be waiting for a few more seconds. All right, cool. So I'm assuming most of you have read this paragraph. So with that, we'll be promptly moving on to the question. And if you have not completed this paragraph, don't fret. As the questions occur, you guys will be more clear about what these are trying to say, right? The first question: modern means of entertainment and communication dash dash street theater. I'll be waiting for a few seconds, and if you guys can answer, please do so. If you can't, I'll be revealing the answer soon. All right. So I'm getting quite a few twos here. And in fact, the correct answer is two. It does not affect street theater because, as it's mentioned in this paragraph, street theater in India is well established ancient form of art. Despite the proliferation of modern means of entertainment and communication, it continues to flourish in India, right? So, despite the proliferation of modern means of entertainment and communication, it continues to flourish in India. This basically implies that modern means of communication have not really curbed the intensity or emotional significance of street theater, right? So, that's basically it. Does not affect street theater. Option number two, right? Next up, in older days, street theater dash dash to villages or small localities of the city. All right, the answers are quite mixed in this one. Some are saying three, some are saying two, but most are saying one, right? And the correct answer is in fact one. In older days, street theater was restricted to small villages or to villages or small localities of the city, right? because it was mentioned in the paragraph that it was localized, this entire action. So that basically means that it is restricted to a particular community, to a particular village, or a particular small locality, right? So hopefully that's clear to everyone as well. uh, Next up, street theater, usually dash dash with issues of public importance. All right, most of you are saying that the answer is three, right? And that is in fact the case. I mean, even looking at it through a basic knowledge perspective as well, you can see that it basically three is the correct answer, right? Because is distance does not really conform to the message that the paragraph is trying to convey. Is performed simply does not make sense, and does not is not right, because street theater is basically used to communicate some sort of message that's important to the general mass. So three is the correct answer in this case. Next, street theater is dash dash as compared to regular drama. All right, most of you are saying that the correct answer is three as well, and that is in fact the case. Because street theater, as it's mentioned in the paragraph, is immensely cost effective compared to regular drama. It's presented in the street, and a few groups of actors do this, and it does not really require as much props or as much dedication or economic capital as regular dramas require. So street theater is really cost effective. That is to say, it's significantly cheaper to host as compared to regular drama. You guys are following me at this point, right? Hopefully, yes. Cool. Um, Lastly, street theater does not create any dash dash impact on audiences. All right, I'm getting answers from Samjana, from Samir, from other people as well. And most of you are saying that the correct answer is three. I'll be waiting for a few seconds to see a few more engagement. Yeah, the majority of you are saying that the correct answer is three, and that is in fact the case. Street theater does not create any psychological impact on audiences. Now, psychological impacts most of the times has got a negative connotation. That is to mean that an impact that is really lasting on audiences and that may harm them in a negative manner. And so street theater does not really create that, right? So, and this is explicitly mentioned somewhere in the paragraph that you previously read. So hopefully you guys were coming from that. And if so, you guys are correct. The psychological is the correct answer, right? All right, so next up, we've got another passage, right? I'll be waiting for a few seconds in this, right? So hopefully you guys will read through this, and then we can move on to the questions as we did previously. All right, hopefully most of you have skimmed through this entire paragraph. As I mentioned before, don't go word by word in most of these. Try to skim through these, and you guys hopefully have got a strong idea of what the message this paragraph is trying to imply. So, this paragraph is about self directed learning. Hopefully, most of you got that, and hopefully, you guys have got the idea of what self directed learning is, right? So, with that said, we'll be moving on to the questions, right? And so, after seeing a particular question, we'll be returning back to this paragraph, and that will make it easier for you guys to search the question's answer as well, right? So, all right, cool. Question number one. All right, so hopefully most of you guys have seen this question properly. All right, so we'll be moving back to the paragraph. So I'll be waiting for a few seconds for you guys to find the answer. In self-directed learning, um, an individual, then that something follows. So try searching. I'm getting quite heavy engagement in the chat. And most of you are saying that the correct answer is one. And that is in fact the case. In self-directed learning, an individual takes initiative with or without the help of others. It's basically mentioned in the first sentence, so it's quite easy to see as well, right? Next up, there's need for self-directed learning because there are four options. So it's basically dealing with the need. So let us go back to the paragraph. Oh, all right, most of you are guessing two, right? So the correct answer is, in fact, two. It helps people to learn more things and learn better. It's mentioned in the paragraph as well, if you guys did not see that. So, as I mentioned before, try going through the answer to every one of these questions is explicitly mentioned in the paragraph as well, right? So, try going through them critically, right? Option number three, which word describes self directed learning? Hopefully, most of you know the answer to this because it was like a premium idea in most of those. Yep, almost every one of you are guessing option number one, active learning, and that is in fact the case. That's the correct answer. So, yep. All right. The modern environment, according to the author, is right. So let's move on to the paragraph. The modern environment, according to the author, is. Yep. So most of you are guessing option number two, and some of you are guessing instructive. But read this last sentence, right? To meet the challenges in today's instructive environment, today's means modern. So it's clearly mentioning that the answer is modern instructive environment. So the correct answer is instructive in this case, right? Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. So the correct answer is option number three, instructive, because it was explicitly mentioned in the paragraph, right? All right, so last one. The synonym for the word diagnosing is dash dash. All right, so that was by mistake. The correct answer is in fact searching. Now I'll be explaining why as well, because this one is quite contrary to what we may think. Diagnosing means to examine in most of the times, right? But in this process, diagnosing comes at the first sentence, right? Self-directed learning in its broadest meaning describes a process in which individuals take the initiative with or without the help of other in diagnosing their learning needs, right? So diagnosing most closely refers to the idea of searching, right? In searching their learning needs. Because you don't examine your learning needs, right? You only search for them. You find something, you discover something, right? So you search for your learning needs. That's why this is the most closely resembling synonym to diagnosing in this context, right? So, one key thing to learn after that particular problem is that the meaning, despite it may have, despite the word having other meanings, right? You have to find the meaning to that word which closely resembles to the meaning that is present in this paragraph, right? So you have to go through this paragraph, find the word, and see the context, and then only see take the correct option and the meaning that it is trying to resemble, right? So hopefully that makes sense to everyone because sometimes it may be confusing as well. All right, so with this, we are done with the second paragraph as well. Now I'll be waiting for a few minutes for you guys to properly read through this paragraph to get the core idea of what it's trying to mean, right? So I'll be waiting for a few minutes. All right, so I'm assuming that most of you went through this paragraph and have got a basic idea of what it's trying to mean or what it's trying to imply. So, with that, let's move on to the question. All right, so most of you are saying one. I'll give you guys the option of going back to the paragraph and then seeing, right? Most of you are guessing one, and the answer is in fact one. Lokmanya Tilak's messages were most effective when he delivered them through his editorials, right? It's been explicitly mentioned in the paragraphs, right? So the correct answer is when delivered them through his editorials, right? Next up, which of the following is a result of Lokmanya Tilak's exemplary life? Right, I'm getting quite a heavy engagement in the chat, but the most of the answers are mixed. Some of you are saying three, some of you are saying two, some of you are saying one. The correct answer in this case is option number three, right? People resolve to fulfill his life's dream, right? So hopefully that makes sense because this too, the core idea of this passage revolves around that fact as well, right? because that's due to basically his influence on people, right? So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Uh, Next up, in the context of the passage, a reformer becomes effective if. All right, I'm getting a heavy engagement in the chat box. Some are saying one, some are saying four. Um, Most of you are saying one as well. All right. So the correct answer in this case is option number four. A reformer becomes effective if he's a person with consistency in his writing and lifestyle, right? Because it's been explicitly mentioned in the paragraph, right, that a person or a reformer, the idea of reforming things, right, or the idea of properly conveying your messages of reformation to the general mass, the only means of it, or the one of the most practical and one of the most efficient ways of doing that is through writing. So once you become consistent with your writing and with your lifestyle in general, then the process of reformation as a whole becomes really effective, right? This can be implied through the paragraph to a large extent. So that is the correct answer, right? Now, next up, which of the following statements about Lokmanya Tilak and his reformers is true? All right, so majority of you are saying four. Their influence was multiplied by 1,000-fold by their imprisonment, and that in fact is the correct answer because he and Lokmanya Tilak and his reformers, their influence due to the fact that they went to prison for a certain cause meant that their entire influence or their scope of influence was immensely increased or multiplied by 1,000 folds, right? Because that basically showed their dedication to a particular cause, right? To the extent that they could even go to prison for that particular thing. Next up, we've got the last question for this paragraph. Which of the following is the general tendency of critics? All right, so most of you are saying one, some are saying three, some are saying four. The answers are basically mixed, right? The correct answer in this case is option number one, right? General tendency of critics, before anything else, is to find the expression or define the real true meaning that the writer is trying to convey, right? Before moving on to the criticism aspect or before moving on to sort of critiquing their writing as a whole, the first objective or the general tendency of critics is to find what the writer is effectively trying to convey to the general mass, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Now, next, we've got another paragraph. I'll be waiting for a few minutes for you guys to properly skim through this. Then we'll get back to questions. All right, so hopefully most of you guys went through this particular paragraph. Now, with that, um, let's move on to the questions. Expression, customs, and ceremonies means. First and foremost, we have to find where this expression is used in this particular passage, right? So, can you guys find where these are used? All right, so hopefully most of you found this. It's used here, the citizens against theft and damage to protect the right of communities and castes to carry out their customs and ceremonies, right? So as long as they do not conflict with the right of others. Now, what does this particular phrase mean in the context of this paragraph, right? That's what the question is asking to us, right? So now, fairs and festivals is not the correct option. Neither is habits and traditions, contrary to what most of you are saying. The correct answer in this case is usual practices and religious rites, right? So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Customs and ceremonies are things that are carried out almost on a daily basis and things that revolve around religious things, religious perspectives, right? So hopefully option number three makes sense to everyone. All right. Which of the following is not implied in the passage? So there are quite a few options here. So let's move on to the paragraph first to see which of these is not implied in the paragraph. I'm getting an immense engagement in the chat box, right? Most of you are saying that the correct answer is three in this case. That is to mean the forces of law transform irresponsible citizens into responsible ones. But that's not true because this or the idea that is trying to convey is properly implied in the passage, right? And the question is asking which of these is not present in the passage or which of these is not properly implied through the passage, right? So option number one, law protects people who respect it. This is obviously implied in the passage in the first few sentences. The force of law transform irresponsible citizens into responsible ones. This too is properly implied in the passage because prisons or basically rehabilitation centers exist due to this particular reason, due to the fact that law can transform irresponsible people into responsible ones. And law acts as a deterrent for committing crimes, right? Because people are more hesitant to committing crimes because law exists, right? So option number four is also implied in the passage, right? But option number two, law ensures people's religion, social rights absolutely and unconditionally, is not implied in the passage, right? Because some social rights, right, or at least some ideas or some context of the religions, they may not properly imply to the truthfulness or the righteousness that law exists, that law possesses, right? So, due to this reason, option number two is not implied in this particular passage, right? Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. So, the correct answer in this case is option number two, right? Let's move on to question number three. Which of the following is not the sole responsibility of the police? All right. So you guys can search through this paragraph, right, for the correct answer. Most of you are saying that the correct answer is option number 4, right, which basically is to maintain peace during extraordinary circumstances, right? But the answers are quite mixed. Some are saying that the option is option number 2 as well, and things of that nature. Now, the thing about this is that the ideas pertaining to this are not properly established or are not explicitly mentioned in the paragraph, right? So you have to imply things from within words. Now, first, the idea of protecting privileges of all citizens, which basically implies the rights of citizens. This can be inferred from this particular paragraph, right? To check violent activities of citizens, this too can be inferred from this paragraph. To ensure peace among citizens by safeguarding individual rights, right? So this can also be implied from this particular paragraph, despite these three not being mentioned properly in this paragraph. So these three are in the safe zone, right? These can be implied and these can be inferred as the responsibility of the police, right? Sole responsibility per se. But option number 4, which basically means to maintain peace during extraordinary circumstances, right? This is not properly inferred in this particular paragraph, right? Because the idea of extraordinary circumstances has not been introduced anywhere in this particular paragraph, right? So from that as well, we can properly see, or we can at least notice that that must not be the sole responsibility of the police, right? So hopefully this is making sense to everyone. Next up, we've got suitable title of the passage would be, right? So these kind of questions you can only do after properly reading through the particular paragraph, right? So if you guys have read through this paragraph properly, which I'll be giving you guys the option to do so right now for a few seconds, right? So if you guys have read through this paragraph properly, you guys would have inferred or at least implied that this paragraph is basically revolving around the idea of police or the department in general, right? The department of people trying to protect law as a whole, right? So from this, what we can basically see from those options is it must be functions of the police, right? Because the paragraph towards the body part and towards the end, right, as it's mentioned, from in these lines, in the last few lines, it effectively includes the functions of police or at least things of that nature, right? So it can be reasonably inferred that the suitable title would be functions of police. Most of you were correct in this particular case, right? All right, so the last question for this particular paragraph, which is the main thrust of the paragraph? Main thrust, as in what is the main message that this particular paragraph is trying to imply, or what's the core idea? All right, so first option, right? Let us try solving this by the process of elimination, right? In the first option, it mentions something related to army in maintaining law and order, but we know that the passage is all about police and their works, right? But the the idea of army is not mentioned in the paragraph. So option number one is not the correct one, right? The second one, it highlights the role of police as superior to army. Now, superiority of police to army is not inferred in the paragraph. In fact, it's not even mentioned in the paragraph. So option number two is not the correct one as well. It points to the responsibility of the minister and inspector general. IG means inspector general of police, right? Now, this can be the possible answer because look at this, right? In the end, it has properly mentioned the idea of that state, or the law and order of a state being in the hands of minister and in the hands of inspector general of police, right? So option number three might be the correct answer, but we can't guaranteedly say that at the particular moment. So let's look at option number four as well. It discusses roles of law-abiding citizens and bad citizens, right? So now, while this idea of law-abiding citizens and bad citizens is mentioned to a certain extent, it is not the main thrust of the paragraph because the basic idea concludes in only one or two sentences, right? The rules of law-abiding citizens. Most of it is about the responsibility of minister and the police. So option number three is the correct answer in this case, right? Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Next up, we've got one of the most famous speeches of history, I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King. So hopefully you guys can go through this and then we'll move on to the questions as well. All right, so hopefully everyone went through this particular paragraph. You don't need to properly read it, just skim through this. We'll come back to this paragraph after we look at the questions, right? Now, the thing is, as I mentioned in the initial tips, that you have to first go through the questions and then only read the paragraph. But these paragraphs are not comparatively longer, right? I mean, they are quite short. So I think you guys can solve these just by reading through this first and then going through the question as well. So, but one of the key things that you have to do while reading these is to make short notes, just a few worded notes, few word sentences in your diary or paper or or anywhere, right? Just to get a clear idea of the importance or significant points in this particular passage, right? So hopefully you guys are doing this. Now let's move on to the questions. What issues does Martin Luther King's speech address? I'll be waiting for a few seconds. So Ajay is saying continuation of racism. Most of them are saying continuation of. All right, so he corrected that to two. Most of you are saying two. right? Some are saying three as well. All right, so now if you guys know Martin Luther King, right, you guys will have implied that it basically infers to something in the lines of ending racism and including civil and economic rights for colored people, right? So option number two would be the correct answer if you look at it from that standpoint. But as I mentioned, you have to read through this paragraph and not let your external knowledge about this particular subject matter come into play, right? So now first, we have properly seen that Martin Luther King is a civil rights activist, right? So from this, we can properly imply that most of his actions are in lines with civil rights, right? But what really guarantees that option number two is the correct option is here, right? In Freedom on August 28, 1963, in which he calls for an end to racism in the United States and called for civil and economic rights, right? So this sentence clears the clears the cluster for us, and option number two should be the correct answer in this case, and it is in fact, right? Right. Hopefully everyone got that question. What pushes King to speak, I have a dream? Almost every one of you are saying option number two, and that is in fact the case, right? Take a look at this. Um, Toward the end of the speech, King departed from his prepared text for a partly improvised peroration on the theme, I have a dream, prompted by Mahalia Jackson's cry. Tell them about the dream, Martin, right? So, Mahalia Jackson's cry thrusted Martin to include that particular phrase most of the times in his speech, right? So he's prompted by Mahalia Jackson. That makes sense, right? Am I clear on this? All right, cool. Yep, the correct answer is option number two. Now, from the last paragraph, give one word for to leave, right? So let's go back to the thing and see where to leave is present. All right, so there is a particular synonym for to leave. To leave is not present here, but the synonym for it is present here. Hopefully, most of you guys can find it. Yep, it's departed, right? King departed from his prepared text for a partly improvised peroration, right? De- departed, they signify leaving. So to leave, departed. Option number one is the correct answer. What is the name of Martin Luther King's famed speech? Right, so I mean, it's present in the paragraph. This is comparatively an easier paragraph, right? The title of this particular speech. Most of you are saying that the name of the speech is I Have a Dream, but that's not the correct option. No, the correct option is I Have a Dream, right? Most of you might have guessed that the correct answer is the Emancipation Proclamation, but that is a historic document that was founded towards the initials of the reign of America, right? So Martin Luther King refers to the Emancipation Proclamation as it's mentioned in the beginning of the second paragraph, right? But that's not the title of his speech, right? Emancipation Proclamation, as a general knowledge, and I'm sharing this, is a document that basically constitutes the law of the United States of America, right? So Emancipation Proclamation is not the correct answer. The correct answer is, in fact, I Have a Dream. Option number four. Or so I think I skipped back a few sentences. All right, so let's move on to this. The correct answer for the previous question was option number four, I Have a Dream, right? So I'm getting quite a few engagement in the chat box here. In front of whom does King speak, right? So it's probably mentioned in the paragraph that King speaks in front of civil rights supporters. They were not specifically the colored people, neither was it Abraham Lincoln, neither was it his friends. They were the civil rights supporter, people who supported the cause that Martin Luther King tried so hard to obtain, right? So the correct answer is option number one in this case. Hopefully that's clear to everyone, right? So this is the last paragraph for today's discussion. So hopefully you guys will read this through properly and we can have a fruitful discussion about this. All right, so hopefully you guys got a clear, you guys understood the more or less the crux of what the paragraph is trying to imply, right? So let's move on to the questions. First, name one change affected in the present situation which hassled to rethinking of the concept of friendship. All right, so most of you are saying that the correct answer is option number two, which is arrival of social media on the scene. And that is in fact true, because take a look at this, right? But in today's cultural landscape of muddled relationships scattered across various platforms for connecting amidst constant debates about whether our Facebook friendships are making us more or less happy, right? From this, we can properly imply that social media, after it came, has compelled us to rethink about what friendship truly means, right? Constant debates and things of that nature, right? So from this sentence, we can reasonably infer that arrival of social media in the scene has led us to rethink the idea of concept, friendship, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Next up, friendship leads to happiness. Is it true? Now you have to answer this based on this particular paragraph, right? Right, so I'm getting a heavy engagement from the chat. Almost every one of you are saying that the correct answer is one. And that is in fact the case because obviously it's mentioned in the first sentence of the second paragraph. Philosophers and cognitive scientists agree that friendship is an essential ingredient of human happiness, right? So basically, that is clear enough for us to imply that. Yeah, the option number one is correct. Yes, researchers have proven that friendship does lead to happiness, right? Next up, did Pigliucci's book discuss intuition too, right? Most of the majority of you are saying that the correct answer is option number four, and that is in fact the case, right? Read this right, but from this part, from this be bought in today's cultural landscape of muddled relationships, scattered across various platforms for connecting amidst constant debates about whether our Facebook friends are making us more or less happy, it pays to consider what friendship actually is. That's precisely what the CUNY philosophy professor Massimo Pigliucci explores in Answers for Aristotle, right? So he effectively discusses about friendship in his book. So the correct answer is option number four. Yes, simple. Is the quality of friends important? Right, Ajay is saying three, Nitish is saying three, Samjana is saying three, Anusha is saying three. Almost every one of you are saying three. Yes, three is in fact the correct answer because the sole idea pertaining to importance of friendship too is mentioned in the second paragraph of this particular passage. So that's the correct answer, right? As per the first paragraph, what are the debates about? All right, I'm getting answers from almost everyone. Chandni, Ajay, everyone saying one. Anusha. Yep, and option number one is in fact the correct answer. They are centered around whether Facebook friends are helping us become more or less happy. I've discussed on this quite a few times previously, but just to show you guys at the end. But in today's cultural landscape, whether our Facebook friends are making us more or less happy, right? So that's what the first paragraph's debate is about. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Option number one, right? So with that, we've come to the end of this particular discussion on reading comprehension. I've included a few useful resources which can be found throughout the internet. You guys can take a screenshot of this page and go through these resources in your free time.